and to be able, yep, right there. So we are going to be recording this so that people can access it. We can make it into some sort of educational tool in the future. People will also be able to access this at the end on OHA's Facebook page, where it's archived there as well. So lots of places to get this information. Um, for those of you tuning in on Zoom, at the end, we would greatly appreciate it if you were to fill out the survey that you'll be prompted to do upon closing of the meeting. And that survey is just to help us really get an idea of how well we're doing, get an idea of if there's any other topics that you would like us to present on. And the idea is just to really cater and create the content to what best serves you. So without further ado, let's kick off. Once again, this is a product of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. My name is Kalihanis. I am the digital archivist that works currently in the research division, and I have been working on the Papakilo database since its inception, which was back in 2007, I believe. So the way that it kind of came about was we have a section within OHA that's called compliance, and the compliance involves the review of environmental assessment and impact statements, cultural impact statements, so on and so forth. Anytime there's development, we review those reports that are developed as a byproduct of that. So what we decided to do was really see how we looked internally to see how we can get our staff to be more efficient and effective in how we report, in how we review those reports, how we respond, because oftentimes our staff would go to the Bishop Museum, the State Library, state archives, all these different places, just as anybody might have to do when they're doing research. So we said, what if there was one place where we could go and kind of tap into everything? So we started to dream about what was possible. Of course, we have the wealth of information located within those environmental assessments and impact statements, but also we thought about how we could have access to other collections, historic collections like the Stokes collection, or Hawaiian language newspapers, which we'll get into in just a bit, land records such as Mahele, the Mahele Index, and so on and so forth. All that information is out there, and we just want to find a place where we can, in a sense, bring the books off the shelves and make all this information accessible. So historic maps, statistics, mele, oli, mo'olelo, the stories, the songs, the chants, all places where our kupuna have left those breadcrumbs for us to kind of follow and show us where to go. Wind names, rain names, place names, images, videos, and so on and so forth. And what did that get us? We created the Papakilo database, which taps into all these different types of collections, where we have presented a database of databases. And a lot of that information inside Papakilo has to do with historical or culturally significant places, events, and even documents from Hawaii. But not only just for OHA staff to access, but for our beneficiaries and the general public as well. So it was definitely trying to, and we're still learning how to get all these different types of information to talk to each other. You know, how can you get land records to talk to, let's see, Hawaiian language newspapers to talk to, say, a whaling ship database, you know, having all those different kids in the sandbox, how do we get them to play nicely? And fortunately, we've been able to find the right partners to work with and the right contractors that helped us to deliver this database that we are now celebrating 10 years. We had our official launch on April 4th. And when we did launch, we launched with 13 collections and just about 500,000 records from 7 partnering organizations. Now, those records mostly consisted of the Mahele Aina Index. We also had genealogical records based off of our partnership with Ulukau. And then we had our Mahele Aina Index, which is all the Mahele records. So a lot of people were tapping into all of those collections, and those still remain the collections that are accessed the most, because here we are 10 years later, and we have grown in our numbers from those 13 initial collections to now 70. We have from about 500,000 records to now 1.1, almost 1.2 million records. And from those 7 partnering organizations, we have now expanded to 18. So it's definitely been a wild ride. It's been fun to be able to engage with all these different community archive organizations, to be able to breathe life back into some of these historic documents that haven't been viewed in years or haven't been accessible in years. And so people are starting to really understand that. And we haven't done, prior to this, we haven't done a lot of promotion because of the fact that we've focused really on creating a database that will best be able to serve our users and at the same time serve as a reliable steward of the information so people can access that. And so our partners are happy with how the information is presented. But within that 10-year span, we have about almost 5.5 million page views, and people are tuning in from all over, from Hawaii, the mainland, of course, California, Washington, and Oregon, the West Coast. But our friends down in Aotearoa, they're also logging on as well in New Zealand, in Nihon, Japan, Japana. We also have people tuning in and logging on in Switzerland and France and all across Europe. So this really is kind of a testament to a lot of work that we've been putting into building this, and it's only going to grow with this promotional series. We hope that it's really being able to serve you folks in the best way that we know how. The database kind of looks like this if you log on to it, and I'll put it in the chat. Let me see them. So that is the link to the database in the chat. It's www.papakilodatabase.com, and we have highlighted those main searches that people really come to watch when they or look for when they log on. People are searching by location, they're searching by genealogy, they search the Mahele records, and they search our newspapers. So to give you kind of a brief overview before I get to our fantastic duo who is going to be presenting. Search by location, we recently updated that page to be an interactive map that allows people to zoom in and zoom out. And the reason why this is important is because sometimes when people are looking for a place like Waimea, they might type in Waimea, but as some of us know, there's 3 Waimea here in Hawaii, that at least 3 Waimea. I'm sure there's more actually, but there's Waimea Kauai, Waimea Oahu, Waimea on Hawaii Island. So being able to zoom in, and even if you don't know the place name, but you can kind of remember, oh, I remember it was around this corner, and you know, and they can zoom in and see those map features. So this was really a big step for us that we're proud of in making available. We hope that that is a little bit more user friendly. Search by collection is another item that we have kind of updated. Now, if you're looking at this, you say that doesn't look like 70 collections. Well, the reason why is because there's so many collections, we had to kind of nest them underneath. So if you click on Bishop Museum, you're going to see some, I think maybe 6 or 7 collections kind of drop down, and they include a good portion of the Hawaiian ethnological notes. Let me see, the Whaling Ship Database, the Stokes collection, the Sullivan collection, let's see, the Kekahuna collection, and I think they're the ethnobotany and the flora and fauna collection. So a lot of information to behold. So I encourage you to check out this out and click around. Don't worry, you're not going to break the database. Just enter searches, click around, and try your hand at the wheel. Somebody said that one of their favorite things is just browsing around, and occasionally they'll just come across something. And one of the places that you can really do that is by accessing the Hawaiian language newspapers. And these newspapers that we have currently housed within Papakilo, they range from 1834 to 1948. And we have another set from 1979 to 2017, and those include OHA's Kawaiola newsletters as well. But there's over 50 newspapers that we have, representing about almost 70,000 pages and 411,000 plus articles. And this is where I will turn it over to the experts. For those of you who are joining us a little bit late, welcome to our Papakilo Database webinar series. Today's featured topic is the Hawaiian language newspapers. My name is Kale Hannes. If you do have any questions throughout the course of this presentation, feel free to put it in the chat. If you're on Zoom, question and answer on Zoom, or if you're on Facebook, put it down in the comments and we'll do our best to get to you. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the members of Awaiʻulu. They are heroes of mine. I love getting cracks from them all the time because we often have meetings and they say, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? So, but they are really champions of Ike Hawaii in all senses. And they are, I would say, the foremost experts of the Hawaiian language newspapers. So Kau'i and Puakea, if you wouldn't mind, turn on your cameras and you can pull up your PowerPoint and you can unmute yourself. And shall we get going on your portion?
Hey, Allah.
All right, that is Puakea and Kau'i. Mahalo for being here. And I will now turn it over to you. Kau'i, do you want to take over on the share?
Sure.
Well, just a word. Thank you, Kale, for that introduction, which is probably more honorific than we deserve or need, but mahalo. We are heavily invested in what I would say, Ike Hawaii. I'll be Puakea Nogelmeyer. I know my tag says Kau'i Sai Dudois, but we are not twins. We're actually just sharing, I think, a platform. So, Kau'i.
I'll be Kau'i, he'll be Puakea. Aloha. Aloha. I'm gonna start our PowerPoint now. Give us a second.
Yeah, we want to walk through sort of what's behind the repositories that are archived in the Papakilo database. Oh, yeah.
Just a note, if you tuned in on Friday, we adjusted this PowerPoint because we ran out of time last Friday. We were rushing to the end. So we adjusted it a little bit and we'll get right into it. So this is kind of a timeline that we've created. Everything in blue is where the newspapers were published. So we go from settlement, contact, kingdom, the monarchy from the 1840s. It begins a little before then, but throughout the monarchy, the overthrow, the purported annexation, and the territory are really the years that are captured in the Hawaiian language newspapers when that's being published. The last newspaper, it runs from 1834, it starts, it ends in 1948. So just before statehood, the newspapers end.
But what we want to mention and what's sort of unique about Hawaii is that the mad drive to literacy that starts in the 1820s and moves forward allows living writers to actually write about that history that preceded literacy. So those first years that were on that chronology are actually pretty well documented in the writings of living writers during the Kingdom era. So in other places, that's very, very rare where that's made possible. So the newspapers, even though they only cover the years that are in blue, they actually are filled with information about the years that are in black above that, which really adds to the incredible value of the content.
Okay, so it kind of starts with Kamehameha Paʻea during his time. He dies in 1819, but the last 20 years of his reign, of his life, there was a lot written about Hawaii, but by foreigners. And so the rest of the world was seeing writings about Hawaii, what was observed by the people who visited here in journals, ship's journals, captain's journals, and it got circulated around the world. This is a journal of Captain Vancouver. This is a letter that 1810 was written on behalf of Kamehameha to King George in England. And you can see at the bottom here on the second page how he tried to write his name. Of course, somebody directed him. We think that most likely John Young is the one who penned, or Vancouver penned this letter for him. And he writes Tama Ma, but that's in his writing. So
under the system in place. But what's really important here is that the reason that the drive for literacy is so heavily fueled is because Hawaiians have been interacting for 40 years. By the time in 1820, when missionaries arrived, they've been interacting for 40 years. They're in control of their nation, and they're able to get anything that they want from foreign ships, from silk underwear to porcelain plates and silver tea sets. So they can get absolutely anything they want, but they want writing. And this is a good example of that. Vancouver in 1893 points out the two chiefs would barely leave the ship. They are so entranced with the man who's keeping the journals, and they want this writing. And Kamehameha signing a letter is a really good example of, obviously they want to play there, but it'd be like us, elders watching the young kids play on the computer and wishing they could be there, but there's nobody to make the link. So they just watch and want for 40 years.
Right. Kamehameha dies in 18. Whoa, I skipped one. Kamehameha dies in 1819, and his son Kalaniʻuoleʻiʻoliho becomes king. And it is during his reign that the missionary party arrives in Hawaii in 1820. So with the coming of the missionaries come a bunch of things. One of the things, the important thing to literacy and newspapers is what they bring with them, what they create between the missionaries and the chiefs is the pi'apa. They create a Hawaiian writing system. P plus A equals pa, pi'apa.
So a new system is put in place.
Something about that?
But well, the first party of missionaries was uniquely skilled in linguistics and able to take what they were hearing and put it down into a written form, working with the scholars of Hawaiian language because they didn't speak Hawaiian. So making sense out of that, it took over a year and a half to develop this system that made that into a written form. And of course, they have a press that allows the printing of new materials. So, but a new system is put in place that during that time, all the Hawaiian chiefs were already being taught to read and write. That was a high demand piece. They were being taught, though, to read and write in English because the missionaries had not yet learned Hawaiian. But they're learning all the muscle memory, and they're learning the relation of written letter to sound. So when the pi'apa comes out, it takes 18 hours, they say, for a fluent Hawaiian speaker to learn to do the reading and writing, to be able to both read and write. That's how closely they aligned the written form to the spoken form.
Right. So January 7th, 1822, the first primer comes off the presses of the Hawaiian alphabet. So this is an example of that. Here we are in 1822, not long after the first primer comes off the presses, and Ka'ahumanu writes this letter to Kamehamalu or Kamamalu. You want to talk about that, Portia?
Yeah, it's really important that, Ka'ahumanu is one of the students who's already learning writing in English. So as soon as the new rules, this is how to do it in Hawaiian, come out, this is only 6 months later. Her writing is better than mine is today. And, perfectly following the clues. If you look at the second page, and she's actually writing to Kamamalu saying, we got your letter, but there's 3 of us and we only got 1 letter. I want more letters. I want hundreds of letters. We want literacy. It will make us wise. So, but the second page of it, she signs the letter with her name and that of her new husband, Kaumoali'i. And she signs it as she has seen it. You can see the cross out. It's always been written by English writers as tamuri. But then she crosses that out and applies these new rules. This puts you right in the moment where she's going, no, it'd be taumuari'i. T's and R's are, fully interchangeable with K's and L's. So kaumuali'i, taumuari'i. She applies the new rules. And boom, 6 months into the project, now she becomes a huge advocate for reading and writing is one of her passions.
This is a really cool letter because it really it shows you the convention being applied, like you see it in action. She writes the old way, scratches it out, and then applies the new convention.
Yeah,
This is
you're
in
in them.
1822, right after the first primer comes off the presses.
She's seen that man's name written by the English captains all that time. Now, this is presented as, of course, Kahuma or Bingham preaching to the people, right? And it's sort of a standard, white preacher working with the brown folk. But what's really critical there is the lady in the back, Kahumanu, is encouraging them to pay heed to this. But if you look, they all have books in their hands. So the Bible was one of the biggest publications available. And so learn Christianity, learn the Bible, but learn to read and write.
Right. And then Liho Liho dies in England in 1824. In 1824, Kauikeoli, Kamehameha III, becomes king in 1825. He proclaims, which becomes kind of his motto, is Heo Puni Palapala Ko'u. Mine will be a nation of literacy. The interesting thing to remember here is that Kauikeoli and his sister Nahi Ana were actually the first two to learn to read and write. So when he makes this proclamation, he wasn't speaking about himself. He was speaking about his people, his nation, that literacy is something he wanted for his nation. And then he does all kinds of things to help make that happen. Starts schools, things get up. The first school starts in Hawaii, Lahaina Luna, in Lahaina.
I'm sorry, Cody, the first teachers' college.
The first teachers' college.
Schools start immediately. Schools start in 1822, or soon after, as soon as the reading and writing is up. So teachers' college. Yeah.
So 1831, it starts up. Lauren Andrews is the principal of Lahaina Luna. He teaches a class to teach the kids this different medium of communication. He gets a hold of a really old Ramage printing press and an old set of discarded typeset. And he teaches this class for the kids to start a paper. Off the presses come 1834, February, Kalama, Hawaii, the first newspaper in Hawaii, comes off the presses.
And I want to point out, we refer to the students as the kids. They're in their 30s and 40s. These are the chosen smart ones from each chief's district are sent to Lahaina Luna to become master teachers. So the students at Lahaina Luna who are developing this new, system, the newspaper, are full adults, most of them. So a few teens, but most of them are in their 20s, 30s, and even 40s. So,
So the first year, the paper is meant solely for the school. The kids have a write-up. The last page is for the students to do write whatever they want about. You want to talk about the animals?
Well, the notion of it was meant to be an educational tool. So on the one hand, Kalama does Bible explanations so that you understand the new concepts of Christianity, but it introduces Hawaiians everywhere to the world around them that they haven't seen. So the first issues are filled with these articles about the animals of the world that are just amazing to the Hawaiian population. Imagine if you've never seen an elephant, a rhinoceros, a giraffe, and whole pages of descriptions of how these animals live, how they breed, what they eat, where they are. So it's an introduction to the world. This newspaper is so in demand, they just have to keep reprinting and reprinting. It becomes immediately a national newspaper.
So that begins the run of the Hawaiian language newspapers. Within the year, Ke Kumu Hawaii, the second paper gets printed. 41, Kanona Nona starts, and then there's a slew of newspapers.
There's 100 of them in the course of 114 years. It's really important that the early ones are mostly handed out. They're from the school, they're from the government, they're from the church. Up until 1860s, it's mostly the editors and the writers are delivering out. From 1861, the Hokuokpaki Pika, Kekoko right behind it. These are independent businesses. They now use their readership. For one thing, they have a subscriber base, but their readership is also filling the pages of the newspaper. So the newspapers become much more interactive. They actually take a role almost like what the internet is for us today. It's the place where you look and find things. A newspaper might be published for 6 months or for 70 years. But at the end of each year, you would save all your issues and have them bound as a book. Sometimes people would write an article responding to something they read in a different newspaper 2 years earlier. It's because they kept those papers and would go back over them. So far more than, there's 125,000 pages were printed in 100 different newspapers. But I use newspapers to keep weeds down in my yard, or we mulch them or recycle. People save them as a printed resource, as a reference. They come up in auctions once in a while in bound copies. That's why people brought them back and had them bound. But it was a national intentional repository. The move from orality to literacy, the notion of being able to take from memorizing data to be able to write it down, made it safe. Because the knowledgeable memorizers, and that was a cultural norm, was to identify the young people who were smart at remembering, train them as memorizers. So, but that's a limited ability, and putting it in writing made it possible to save forever. And the notion of a smart person dying was like a library burning down. So writing helped counter that. This says something good.
So from the beginning of the newspapers in 1834, you see pleas throughout the newspapers to take this, use this newspapers, let it be printed. So this is 1834. Once you all pass away, traditional knowledge may disappear completely. To avoid that, let it be printed as a sign that the chiefs care about the things of old. So almost from the very beginning, they start telling their people, use this, print it, write your stories here and let it be printed so that it will be held, the information will be held.
And
You have to consider that really all the changes and transitions are happening in Hawaii at this time.
right.
They're seeing the big cultural changes, generational changes, the things that used to be practices before are changing. So they're saying, write it here, keep it here so we will know it. In 1842, Samuel Kamakau writes, write it here so it will be clear to those of this generations and those to come. And here he prints the Mo'oku Hau from the beginning of time, from Kumuhonua, and he ends this all the way at Kauikeolu. So this is quite an extensive, almost the first printing of genealogy in the newspapers. This 1861 in Kahoku Okopaki Pika, this is a mele composed for Kauikeoli, and it's written by his, Apauku is written by his brother Liho Liho, his father Kamehameha, and his uncle Kuakini.
Awesome that this is important. It's all those encouragements, write it down, save it, save it. This mele, we didn't know Kamehameha was a composer. At the birth of his second son, he writes a mele for the birth. But there was no writing at the time. So someone was assigned to memorize that. And it wasn't that memorizer who put it in the paper, but someone from the next generation. So this talks about how these legacy mele memorized within families start to appear in the newspapers, for fear of loss eventually. Now, his name is misspelled at the bottom of his mele, which is why it didn't surface real quickly on a search. But there you have it. Right. The newspapers have these kinds of absolute cultural gems in them.
Just a note here, there's really a lot of material written about Kamehameha Paea by Hawaiians and foreigners alike, tons. But you never see anything that is written by him that captures his own thought. So this is a real gem, for those who want to study Kamehameha and how he organized his thoughts and his wishes
also,
for his son.
Koei, it's also culturally insightful that the highest chief in the nation is a composer.
Yeah.
And that's something that didn't get mentioned in the history books that I read.
Right. So the newspapers are really cool. They span time. It allowed, like Poikia said, it really was the social media tool of the time. So this is an example. It's a little entertaining, but it's an example of of an announcement in the newspaper, Olelo Ho'olaha. In 1862, this was published by Kiope. Kiope is a husband, and he's writing to let all the merchants know not to extend credit to his wife. And he says in his Olelo Ho'olaha, for she left our bed for no reason of her own accord. And he warns the shopkeepers that I will not pay for her anything for her, so do not let her charge. Here's an example of people reading the paper and responding. So this was in June 5th. On June 12th, the wife Kavika responds. And she said, he lies that it was I who left him. I never left that Kiope. After we were wed, we lived together for a few months, but I became ill. And so began Kiope's leaving me and staying with another woman. He then moved to Honolulu to live with my mother in fornication. And that is his woman to this day. Then she goes on and she insists, I will indeed go and make purchases using credit, and it will be Kiope, my husband, who shall pay. For the covenant of our marriage is not broken. With my dear aloha, Mrs. Kavika. So, you know, it's
actually,
little, yeah.
There's a slew of these because that was the law.
Yeah.
Is that the husband was responsible if he didn't claim, move toward divorce and claim that he will not cover the debts. But her countering that totally erases his claim. So
right. This would be an interesting ohina to study and all these responses that come through. So that's just an example of how they were responding to each other in the newspapers. It was a tool of communication. Then we go back to the continuation of these pleas with them to use these papers. J.H. Kanipu in 1862 writes about legends and mele that Hawaiian generations of 1870, 1880, 1890, and 1990 will need to know this.
And this, I have to say, how presaging. He was encouraging the great, because not everyone knew all of the ka'au and the histories. He's encouraging those who held those bodies of knowledge. Please put it in print. Those in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and 130 years will need to know. And I have to say, I tripped across this in 1990, doing microfilms and spinning reels. And it was like, oh my God, he's talking to us today. He's talking about us. And it really was moving. So his plea actually opened up a wave of some of the great storytellers started to put their material in print. And the legacy of legends and things that came into the newspapers is partly a response to this kind of encouragement.
Right. It continues on in 1865. Samuel Manaikalani Kamakau writes, we strive to find what is accurate, for it will be of great value to future generations for all times. Coming all the way up to 1906, when Joseph Moku Ohai Poipoi wrote, he was an editor for Kanai'ao Puni, and he printed this article for almost a year. It ran in Kanai'ao Puni because it was that important to him. Essentially, he's saying the continual cultivation of the history in the young people until they are mature adults is a perpetuation of love and regard between this new generation, those who have gone on before, and those yet to pass at the furthest reaches of this existence. He is employing his people. I mean, he's really
imploring.
He's begging them almost to learn. This article talks about the embarrassment of the young people in 1906 who speak their language, and it makes shame to hear them speak their language so badly. Whether they're speaking English or Hawaiian.
There was a really serious fear that Hawaiian-ness, Hawaiian knowledge would disappear. And so when she says that this was published for a year and a half, this is 6 days a week. He tagged this into his newspaper, which he was filling with historical material about Kamehameha, the origin of the kingdom, legendary material. He was making it an educational tool in 1906 and fostering the parents to say, get your children to enjoy this, trying to maintain the integrity of Hawaiian knowledge. 1906, this really talks about that transition into It's territorial era. It's a lot of change going on. So there's
But
incredible repository.
this is also his PR. I mean, it is a paper and they're a business.
Yeah,
They're about to release the story Kama'olelo Kamehameha. So what he's employing, he's imploring his people is to read this story so they will know the history of their homeland.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying. You have to know the story of Kamehameha. If you don't, then more better market baby time. I don't know. There we go.
but
Anyway.
how did something like this? How did we become unaware of this? Because in the early chronology, what we showed is in the year 2000, I think there's really a new renaissance of knowledge. There was a renaissance of culture and language and things in 1970, but it's 2000 that we start to recognize this huge repository. How had it become invisible for 50 years and almost a century? Well, this is part of it, the move to English.
Well, we're not going to go into the political history of Hawaii, but we all know the transitions from 1893 to the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s bring in another form of government. There's another form of governance who are now in charge, right? They put these flyers were made and put everywhere in all the government buildings everywhere. Speak English, the language of America. Speak American. Pidgin is better than nothing. The American language is best. But nobody wants to hear foreign tongues, especially the enemies. Use and encourage others to speak American.
Yeah.
So from the turn of the century, from 1900 through, God, I don't know when it happened, but for the next 40 years, Hawaiians and Hawaii is really in turmoil. There's an internal turmoil. Every family has their stories, the things that are lost and the decisions have to be made for what will we fight for, what will we hold on to, right? So that's kind of what contributes.
But Kelly, I do want to talk about the tug of war over Hawaiian language versus all the other languages. Hawaiian was the national language and everybody spoke it, but there was a tug of war over English was the world language.
Right.
And so for 40 years prior to the overthrow, there was already a tug of war over, well, all the kids should learn English so they can take the best positions in government, so they can work with the international trade. So there was always a drive for that. It's after the overthrow that it's like, if you don't have English, you just aren't able to participate fully. So you've got Hawaiian speaking parents that are encouraging their children to just don't learn Hawaiian, learn English. So you've got kids that are totally unaware of all of this, but they've never seen a newspaper. They're not participating in the diminishing Hawaiian language community. So that's how it becomes invisible, is English primacy simply erases awareness of it.
Right. So for the next, from that time, Hawaiian language, the newspapers run until 1948. From the end of the Hawaiian language newspapers, which was Kahokua Hawaii, the Hilo Run newspaper, it stops in 1948. Statehood comes in. It kind of goes away. The Hawaiian language, the newspapers, it kind of falls away. We pop back up, and when we pick into this, is the only way to access this repository of 114 years of newspapers is through microfilm. Because in the 60s and 70s, there was a microfilming project to microfilm the Hawaiian language newspapers were included. So the originals are in archives in people's homes and chests and treasure chests. And online, the only other way to access them was to go to libraries, archives, and see them on microfilm. So that is it's time consuming. You got to go one by one, and it's a hit or miss process. You could take months to find an article that you're looking for through the microfilm. In 2002, we started a project that was called Ho'olaupa'i under the Bishop Museum. We incorporated optical character recognition technology along with greenstone freeware to make the newspapers available and put them up online. So majority of what's up online comes from this project, Ho'olaupa'i. Obviously, we've added to it over the years, but that's kind of the beginning of the online newspaper repository that we know today. There's a lot of people and a lot of hands that have gone into it over the last 17 years to get it better, to make it fuller, to add to the collection. But that's what we have in line online at Papakilo Database and at ulukau.org.
Yeah.
So what we wanted to do today is, you all know, I'm sure are familiar with the Hawaiian language newspapers. We thought we would give you just two examples. Puake and I would both show an example of something really cool that we found in the newspapers that are applicable to today, and why this repository is so important. So we're going to start with Puake, Hurricane with a History. You want to talk about that?
And this is totally a side product of another project. We were actually given a block of funds. I was up at the university, and JIMAR, which is the Joint Institute of Marine and Atmospheric Research, was basically told, be nice to Hawaiian language. There's a new Hawaiian Knowledge College, and be nice. So they said, well, we can support a project. What would you like? They said they're interested in weather. So we said, well, we could look into the Hawaiian language record and find new things on weather. So we spent 2 years actually culling 5,000 articles, every kind of weather phenomena, whether it was from rainbows to flooding to any kind of storms. There's even a few earthquakes in there. But 5,000 articles. And when we handed it back to the director, he said, well, is there anything on hurricanes? Because I'm particularly interested in hurricanes, and especially this one. He says, there's a storm that we have only one sort of write-up from the Kohala Seminary that, from what they describe, it sounds really serious. Well, in our database, we had 17 articles about that one storm. There were reports from Hamakua, there were reports from Kohala, there were reports from Maui, Molokai. So we actually assembled that together, and the science folk, the meteorology folk, were able to take the translations and extrapolate that, well, if kukui trees are falling over, and they're a 2-foot diameter, it means that the wind was this high. So they were able to not only tell the wind direction, the force of it, and where it came in and moved along, map the whole trajectory of a storm and identify it very clearly as a level 3 hurricane that came up through Waipi'o, hit Hamakua and Kohala, moved over across Maui, across Molokai and out to sea. Now, what was important there and why this man was sort of looking for it, by the time we were doing this in 2015, they were actually proposing legislation to drop hurricane insurance for the island of Hawaii, as modern law is that Hawaii Island was immune. This is before Isel slapped things. That's the trajectory they were able to map. But so they were going to lower the building codes and drop hurricane insurance, as Hawaii Island, they looked back, and for 70 years, for 100 years, there was no hurricanes, but they hadn't looked 110 years. And so, 120. So this was 1871. Obviously, a serious hurricane had hit. The write-up that we did on this, and we started to present the material, it actually took away that drive for changing the legislation. So insurance was still in place when Isel did hit. And even though Isel dropped from hurricane level to just tropical storm, $20 million in damage was still under insurance, thank goodness. And the infrastructure, the guidelines for hurricane building were not lowered. So the relevance of that material became really, really worthwhile. So this article was published in one of the scientific journals, and Steve, what is Steve's last name? My co-author on this?
Bussinger.
Yeah, Steve Bussinger. He's a meteorologist up at the university. So he assembled many of the data banks. The chart showed the different rain that was over the years that we had all pulled together. So anyway, this became really pretty critical information for our modern planning.
Right. So that's one example of how this information in the newspapers has an effect in today's life. The other thing I wanted to share is today or coming up this month, on July 31st is La Ho'iho'ia. For the last 20 years, people have been gathering and celebrating La Ho'iho'ia, and they've been telling this story and sharing everything about it. Well, just this past year, no, earlier in the year, last year, one of our translation teams was focusing on James Kaulia. And in their collection of material, they gathered this article. And it was from December 14th, 1896. It's about La Kuokoa in Hawaii. And James Kaulia is giving a speech about it. Well, there's a section in here that called Mo'olelo o Ko Marshal Ho'una Iana Ielele. And it's like, what? So what we found from just this doing this research with our teams is this man named JFB Marshall. And he was an envoy for the only envoy appointed and commissioned for La Ho'iho'ia, because Ha'alilio and Richards had already left the year before, and they didn't know how to contact them once Paulette hit Hawaii. So this young man, JFB Marshall, was an American from Massachusetts. He was 20 years old at the time that they commissioned him, but they found him trustworthy. They commissioned him with full envoy plenipotentiary powers to go to England. If he could meet up with Ha'alilio and Richards, then do so. If not, gave him the authority to speak on behalf of the king, like it was the king. He could do treaties, he could do agreements, resolutions, as if he was the king.
And he carried the documents.
Right.
Carried all the letters.
Yeah, and then in the whole, if you tracked history, I always wondered, how did Ha'alilio and Richards receive all these letters from Kekuanau, John Papa'i, Kaui Keole? How did they have all that while they were, in England? Well, JFB Marshall hand carried a bunch of them to them and handed it to them in person.
He was James Bond.
Finding an article from 1883 printed in Harper's Magazine that was written by JFB Marshall. It's called An Unpublished Chapter of Hawaiian History. And here he gives a first-person account of his whole journey, everything that took place, the day he left, the day he got commissioned, what he did. It's amazing. This became part of, we have built Kipapa, an educator resources thing online now. And it's about La Ho'iho'ia. And there's so much to find about this man. I mean, JFB Marshall, so he's in Hawaii, he returns to Hawaii, he meets up with Ha'alilio them. He goes and meets with Lord Aberdeen, Guizot. He's in negotiations with Ha'alilio and Richards. He then returns to Hawaii, lives here for 20 years. He's part of our legislature. He heads the committee for new roads and finances and stays here for 20 years, returns to Massachusetts. He becomes a trustee for the Hampton University or Hampton Institute of the time, where he befriends a young man named, what's his name? Booker T. Washington.
Oh, indeed.
He befriends a young man named Booker T. Washington. He helps him start a whole school, gets him into the college. He graduates with a degree. Then he wants to begin his own university. James F.B. Marshall funds it, helps him buy the land. I mean, this man is an amazing man, and he starts off his history as being an envoy plenipotentiary for the Hawaiian Kingdom. He returns to Hawaii in 1889, where he gives a speech on the independence of Hawaii. I mean, this is such a mind-blowing addition to the story of La Ho'iho'ia. It's awesome. So
we would not have known
to share. Go ahead.
We would not have known to look for him.
Right.
If we hadn't started to trip across these sort of disconnected references, and boom, a whole story emerges. James Bond of 1843.
The James Bond of it all, right? So that was our talk.
We meant to be shorter.
That's us. That's it.
But it does leave a few minutes for questions. So.
Right. Mahalo nui Kau'i and Puakea for showing showcasing all that the newspapers can be, how the information within there can be applied to different types of, I guess, research, if you will. I'm going to take
Yes.
back
Um,
the
Can
shared
I just say,
screen.
if I can throw in, Kale, the notion of you can identify, you can always search for a single piece, you can search for some gem. But sometimes, I mean, looking at a swath of information,
Right.
you can really call important material. I know we did another project, I just want to mention that, the idea of the El Nino cycles, which we had the worst a few years ago, the worst that we've had in the history of the El Nino cycle. Well, when I found out that I'm older than our knowledge of the El Nino cycle, we were able actually to track some of the meteorological events that identify them and take it another 100 years back.
Right.
It's really an important asset for us today. So they've got indications of what was the cycle in years of a century ago.
Right. Definitely valuable information. For those of you who are attending, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat or in the question and answer on Zoom or in the comments. I think you folks have done a fantastic job because as of right now, there are no questions.
Are there any viewers? Yeah, it's
But
Oh, good.
right, so we're doing this, as I mentioned in the beginning and periodically throughout the presentation, we are doing this promotional push to not only share about the information of, share about Papakilo, the database itself, but kind of also shine a spotlight on some of our partners and the collections that they've contributed to the database. So you'll see up on the screen that for future webinars, if you want to sign up, go to www.oha.org, Papakilo webinar, /Papakilo webinar. Next month, actually in a couple of weeks, I would say, we are going to bring Kau'i and Puakea back for a hanaho because there are no questions. They're so complete. But they're also going to be focusing on the Hawaiian National Bibliographies, which is a collection that they were able to help us procure through the University of Hawaii Printing Press and of course its author David Forbes. And we're going to also dive into some of the collections that we found when we went on our East Coast. How would you say that? Kind of an investigatory trip or
Research.
expedition to kind of see what was out there.
Right, right.
Okay, we'll cover some of that. Great.
We have a question that came in that says, who was allowed to write in the Hawaiian newspapers?
That is so important because when I had presented, we were bringing out the story of Hi'iaka, we were presenting it to one of our funders, and because the story is filled with sex, drugs, and rock and roll, they said, how did this get by the censors? Especially from the time of the independent press, but from early on, it's focused on education and Christianizing, but all of the adult students at Lahaina Luna were able to put in their material. So there are oli and there are traditional stories. But once the independent press emerged, anyone could write for the newspapers. It was the editor's choice as to what actually went in. But it's not like there's a board of censors or there's and if you didn't like what you were seeing in the paper or they wouldn't publish your stuff, you could set up your own newspaper. I mean, that was another notion. There's really quite a broad range of writers. And sometimes the editor would include a note saying, we don't agree with this opinion piece, but we're going to include it because we believe in the public's need to see different opinions. There were public moorings. You could not criticize the king in the newspapers. Now that falls apart over time. And after the Emma and Kalakaua sort of debacle, there are very critical pieces in the newspaper about the king. But deeply sexual things, nope, not included. Personal diatribes were oftentimes excluded. So sometimes the newspaper itself would give guidelines as to what they felt was appropriate, but there really is zero censorship in that way. So There were national sort of ethics. When Kaho Mana Kahiko was being published in, and it was segments that were written by adult students at Lahaina Luna. And the note that went with it to the editor said, some of this you may not find appropriate for the general public. You may edit it as needed. So, I mean, there was the power of the editor was huge.
Mahalo for that answer to that actually very good question. Somebody said, let me see, we have a couple of comments on the Zoom side that says, Jim, this is from Zeta, Jim Bartles told me read or skim every story on the page that pops up. You'll never know what gems you find. I guess that's kind of a good point, because oftentimes, as we know, newspapers now, you know, the front news is on the front page, right? The top news stories are on the front page. Was there some sort of formula in how the newspapers were structured?
Can I say that Jim Bartels was brilliant because things were fitted in. That was important. But the front and back page of what was often a 4-page paper were often printed well in advance. That really saved the trouble of, so the real news of the day was on the front page. The overthrow of Liliu's government didn't make the front page because, of course, the front page was pre-printed, basically.
Right.
So you had to be
and most times the front pages would have foreign stories. They would have all the foreign news, foreign stories, foreign.
Or they'd have
For
stories.
the period where there was a lot of the foreign stuff, the local things you'd find on page 2. From page 2 on is where you'd start to see.
Right.
And it wasn't like today's newspapers. The
No,
front
not at
page wasn't, you know, big accident in Kailua. That's not how the Hawaiian language newspapers went.
The front page was often, a long running legend or some kind of story, oftentimes foreign, but oftentimes Hawaiian. But that would be what would lure the readers, as those often stopped on a cliffhanger, so that you buy the next issue, of course.
Right. So, but really, I think in the newspapers, it could be anywhere. There's no rule for where you find these gems. Sometimes it's on a completely different topic, but in the course of explaining the topic, you're going to slide gems in there that are absolutely amazing things that you would never expect to find.
And also, what is a gem, right?
Yeah.
You could be looking through the advertisements and find, well, for heaven's sake, they brought an elephant into the bookstore. Yeah. It'll be here for a week. It's, you know, it's just sitting on a ship. And that's in the advertisements, because it's good PR for the store. So what is a gem? And you'll find them where you find them. Yeah.
And depending on what you're looking for, you know, and that.
I think we've devoured your time, Kale.
No, that's.
Did it again.
This is the reason why I brought you on, because a lot of people have questions about these things, and who better to answer than you folks. There was somebody that commented, Vanessa, and I believe she's tuning in from
Ladana.
Yeah.
London.
And she said, I love to research on kanikau. Do you have any recommendations to Kokua? Like how to help her?
The newspapers are the largest source of kanikau. There's been a number of scholars who have collected large bodies of them, Rubelite Johnson being one of them, but they are from the beginning of the newspapers to the end. Kanikau were a tradition. And as a matter of fact, when a whole year's subscription was $2, to get your kanikau published could be $1. So it was an expensive piece to put in, but they were so culturally embedded that every newspaper often carried, if not in every issue, carried in regular issues, kanikau. So to be able to find yourself a vocab list, kanikau is your opening one, but you'll see, even in the ones listed under kanikau, you'll find other words that are common. So uahala. So look under ku'ulei, something. There's a number of other ways they were introduced, but you'll find there's probably 2,000 or 3,000 that I've seen just in the course of years of looking in the newspapers. Kanikau are maybe the most common kind of mele that are in the newspapers.
Right.
And that's actually a good tip about how to do research. Sometimes the more information that you put in, the better it will help slim down your results.
And
Also within Papakilo, there's ways to kind of I guess filter your searches, because if you enter a search in, you'll see the results, but on the left hand side you'll be able to kind of, if you're looking for a certain time frame, you can click on that and kind of go through there. Or if you're looking for a certain newspaper in particular, a publication, you can kind of filter it by the newspaper publications. You can
Yeah.
check out the different articles or advertisements or illustrations. So
Okay.
there's a lot of different ways that we've tried to be able to pare down the results, because if you just type in a search for I a name, you're going to get tons and tons of results.
but
Right.
Kale, if I could just point that if you know a name, you're looking for a kanikau for someone. If you have the name and the word uahala, okay, just have
Right.
or hala, but make sure that you're looking in a single article, not on a page.
Right.
Otherwise, you get, Kule Mokihana is her name, and Wahala is in a whole different article. If you look for Kule Mokihana and Hala, you're very likely to find either the obituary or the kanikau.
Right.
Right.
Well, we're going to start wrapping things up, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. We're just a little past our time where we said we're going to be finished, but I'm sure a lot of you were able to get a lot of great information. Once again, my name is Kale Hannes with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. We have some upcoming webinars that you can see on the screen. August 6th and 9th, we'll bring back Puakea and Kau'i, and they will be talking about the Hawaiian national bibliographies and collections from the East Coast that we are able to find. In October, we will be focusing on Hula Preservation Society. So in order to sign up for those webinars, please click on www.oha.org/Papakilo webinar. For those of you on Zoom, if you are signing out, please fill out the survey so we can kind of get a really great gauge about how we're doing, so I can show that these webinars are, valued by our general public and our beneficiaries. So thank you for the questions. And I will stay on a little bit longer to answer any questions. If you do have any questions that you think about afterwards, feel free to just send me an email or send Oaiaulu an email at the information that is listed on the screen. Also, this video will be posted on OHA's website or on OHA's Facebook page for people to access at a later time. So if you found the information, informative, or the presentation, entertaining, feel free to just click that share button and it's shared out. So I think that's about it for me. I will, like I said, I will stay on, but big mahalo to Dr. Puakea Nogameyer and Kau'i Saidudwa. Always a pleasure to see you folks. And the information will stay up on the screen for all of you tuning in. We hope you enjoy the rest of your Aloha Monday evening, and stay tuned because we will have a lot more presentations coming up in the future that are just as informative and just as entertaining. Take care and aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. Yeah.
record.